Good morning. We're back reading The Tale of Despereaux. We're starting on chapter 40, page 204. We're almost to the end of the book, so we'll have to be thinking about what the next book is going to be. Chapter 40 is called Forgiveness, and if you remember, we left Despereaux. He had just woken up in the pantry, and he was going to find the king. And I guess Winston wants to come and read too. So he's going to try to sit in the chair with me. Come on, come on. Yeah. Okay. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. Get down. Come on. Get down. Get down. Get down. Okay, chapter 40. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there. And so Despereaux slipped through a hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council, 13 mice and one most very honored head mouse, sitting around their place of wood, debating important mouse matters. Despereaux stopped and stood very still. Fellow honored mice. No. Hey. Let me move so that you can see everything. Okay. Well. No. Come on. Winston, no. All right, there you go. Where was I? Fellow honored members, he said. A ghost! A ghost! And he raised a shaking paw and pointed it at Despereaux. The other mice turned and looked. And there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck like a thin trail of blood. Despereaux, said Lester. Son, you've come back. Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had only been gone a few days, but his father seemed to have aged years in his absence. Son, ghost of my son, said Lester, his whiskers trembling, I dreamt about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong. No, called the most very honored head mouse. No. I've destroyed it, said Lester. I've destroyed the drum. Will you forgive me? He clasped his paws together and looked at his son. No, shouted the head mouse again. No, do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community. Lester ignored the head mouse. Son, he said, please. Despereaux looked at his father, at his gray-streaked fur and trembling whiskers and front paws clasped together in front of his heart, and he suddenly felt as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small and so sad. Forgive me, said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, is, I think, something very much like hope and love, a powerful, wonderful thing. And a ridiculous thing, too. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think of a son that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could even ever forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, there are words, Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, I forgive you, Pa. And he said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop it from breaking in two. Despereaux, reader, spoke the words that saved himself. And then he turned from his father and spoke to the whole mouse council. You were wrong, and all of you, he said. You asked me to renounce my sins. I ask you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent. Never, said the head mouse. Despereaux stood before the mouse council, and he realized that as he was a different mouse than he had been the last time he had faced them. He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter. Not at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. He was gone. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. Mice of the council, he said, we have been paid a visit by a ghost who told us to repent. Now we will take a vote. All in favor of saying that visit did not occur, say aye. And from the members of the mouse council there came a tiny but emphatic chorus of ayes. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father. Lester Tilling had turned his head away from the others of the mouse council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he had been forgiven. Chapter 41, The Tears of a King. Despereaux found the king in the peas room, sitting on his daughter's bed, clutching the tapestry of her life to his chest. He was weeping, although weeping really is too small of a word for the activity that the king had undertaken. The tears were cascading from his eyes. A small puddle had formed at his feet, and I am not exaggerating. The king, it seemed, was intent on crying himself a river. Reader, have you ever seen a king cry? When the powerful are made weak, when they are revealed to be human, to have hearts, their diminishment is nothing short of terrifying. You can be sure that Despereaux was terrified, absolutely, but he spoke up anyway. Sir, he said, the mouse to the king. But the king did not hear him, and as Despereaux watched, King Philip dropped the tapestry and took the golden crown from his lap and used it to beat himself on the chest over and over again. The king, as I have already mentioned, had several faults. He was nearsighted. He made ridiculous, unreasonable, difficult to enforce laws, and much in the way of maigre-sou, he was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. But there was one extraordinary, wonderful, admirable thing about the king. He was a man who was able and willing to love with his whole heart. And just as he had loved the queen with his whole heart, so too he loved his daughter with the whole of it, even more than the whole. He loved the Princess P with every particle of his being. She had been taken from him. But what Despereaux had come to say to the king had to be said, and so he tried again. Excuse me, he said, and he wasn't certain really how a mouse should address a king. Sir did not seem like a big enough word. Despereaux thought about it for a long moment. He cleared his throat. He spoke as loudly as he was capable of speaking. Excuse me, most very honored head person. King Philip stopped beating his crown against his chest, and he looked around the room. Down here, most very honored head person, said Despereaux. The king, tears still falling from his eyes, looked at the floor and squinted. Is that a bug speaking to me? He asked. No, said Despereaux. I am a mouse. We met before. A mouse, bellowed the king. A mouse is but one step removed from a rat. Sir, said Despereaux, most very honored head person, please, you have to listen to me. This is important. I know where your daughter is. You do? Said the king, and he sniffed. He blew his nose on his royal cloak. Where? He said, as he bent over to look more closely at Despereaux. 1 tear, 2 tears, 3 enormous king-sized tears fell with an audible plop onto Despereaux's head and rolled down his back, washing away the white of the flower, revealing his own brown fur. Sir, most very honored head person, sir, said Despereaux, as he wiped the king's tears out of his own eyes. She is in the dungeon. Liar, said the king, and he sat back up. I knew it. All rodents are liars and thieves. She is not in the dungeon. My men have searched the dungeon. But no one really knows the dungeon except rats, sir. There are thousands of places where she could be hidden, and only the rats know. Your men would never be able to find her if the rats did not want her found. Ugh, said the king, and he clapped his hands over his ears. Do not speak to me of rats and what they know, he shouted. Rats are illegal. Rats are against the law. There are no rats in my kingdom. They do not exist. Sir, most very honored head person, this is not true. Hundreds of rats live in the dungeon of the castle. One of them has taken your daughter. And if you will send, the king started humming. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Anyway, what you say is wrong because you are a rodent and therefore you are a liar. He started to hum again. And then he stopped and said, I hired fortune tellers and a magician. They are coming from a distant land. They will tell me where my beautiful daughter is. They speak the truth. A mouse cannot speak the truth. I am telling you the truth, said Despereaux. I promise. But the king would not listen. He sat with his hands over his ears, humming loudly, with big fat tears that rolled down his face and fell to the floor. Despereaux sat and stared at him in dismay. What should he do now? He put a nervous paw up on his neck and pulled the red thread, and suddenly his dream came flooding back to him. The dark and the light, and the king swinging his sword, and the terrible moment when he realized that the suit of armor was empty. And then, reader, as he stood before the king, a wonderful, amazing thought occurred to the mouse. What if the suit of armor had been empty for a reason? What if it had been empty because it was waiting? It was waiting for him. You know me. That is what the knight in his dream had said. Yes, Despereaux said out loud in wonder. I do know you. I can't hear you, said the king. I have to do it myself, said the mouse. I will be the knight in shining armor. There is no other way. It has to be me. Despereaux turned. He left the weeping king and went to find the threadmaster. The threadmaster was sitting atop his spool of thread, swinging his tail back and forth and eating a piece of celery. Well, look here, he said when he saw Despereaux. Would you just look at that? It's the mouse who loved the human's princess, back from the dungeon in one piece. The old threadmaster would say that I didn't do my job well because you are still alive. But I must have tied the thread incorrectly. But it is not so. How do I know it is not so? Because the thread is still around your neck. He nodded and took a bite of his celery. I need the rest of it, said Despereaux. The rest of what? Your neck? The rest of the thread. Well, I can't just hand over to any old mouse. They say red thread is special. It's sacred. though I myself, having spent so much time with it, know it for what it is. What is it? Said Despereaux. Thread, said the threadmaster, and he shrugged and took up another loud bite of celery. Nothing more, nothing less. But I pretend, friend, I pretend. And what, may I ask, do you intend to do with the thread? Save the princess, said Despereaux. Ah, yes, the princess, the beautiful princess. That's how this whole story started, isn't it? I have to save her, said Despereaux. There is no one but me to do it. It seems to be the way of most things. No one to do the really disagreeable jobs except for oneself. And how exactly will you use a spool of thread to save the princess? A rat has taken her and hidden her in the dungeon. So I have to go back to the dungeon. It is full of twists and turns and hidden chambers. Like a maze, said the threadmaster. Yes, like a maze. And I have to find my way back to her, wherever she is hidden. And then I have to lead her out again. And the only way to do that is with the thread. Gregory the jailer tied a rope around his ankle so he would not get lost. And as the mouse said this, he shuddered, thinking of Gregory and his broken rope, dying, lost in the darkness. Said Despereaux, I will use thread. The threadmaster nodded. I see, he said, and he took a meditative bite of celery. You, my friend, are on a quest. I don't know what that is, said Despereaux. You don't have to know. You just feel compelled to do something. The impossible, important task at hand. Impossible, said Despereaux. Impossible, said the head threadmaster. Important, he said. He sat chewing his celery and staring somewhere past Despereaux. Then suddenly he leapt off of his stool. Who am I to stand in the way of a quest, he said. Roll her away. I can have it? Yes, for your quest. Despereaux put his front paws up and touched the spool. He gave it an experimental push forward. Thank you, he said, looking into the eye of the threadmaster. I don't even know your name. Hovis. Thank you, Hovis. There's something else. Something that belongs to the thread. Hovis sat in a corner and came back. Hovis went into the corner and came back with a needle. You can use it for protection. Like a sword, said Despereaux. Like a knight would have. Yes, said Hovis. He gnawed off the end of the thread and used it to tie the needle around Despereaux's waist. Just like so. Thank you, Hovis, said Despereaux. He put his right shoulder against the spool of thread and pushed it forward again. Wait, said Hovis, and he stood up on his hind legs, put his paws on Despereaux's shoulder, and leaned close to him. Despereaux smelled the sharp, clean scent of celery as the threadmaster bent his head, took hold of the thread around Despereaux's neck with his sharp teeth, and pulled on it hard. There, said Hovis, when the piece of thread broke and dropped to the ground. Now you're free. You see, you're not going into the dungeon because you have to. You're going because you chose to. Yes, said Despereaux, because I am on a quest. The word felt good and right in his mouth. Quest. Say it, reader. Say the word quest out loud. Is it an ordinary word? It is. It is an ordinary word, isn't it? So small and yet so full of wonder, so full of hope. Goodbye, said Hovis, as Despereaux pushed the spool of thread out of the threadmaster's hole. I will never have known a mouse who has made it out of the dungeon only to go back out into it again. Goodbye, friend. Goodbye, mouse among mice. Chapter 43 is called What Cook is Stirring. That night, Despereaux rolled the thread from the threadmaster's lair along innumerable hallways and down 3 flights of stairs. Reader, allow me to put this in perspective to you. Your average house mouse, or castle mouse, if you will, weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 ounces. Despereaux, as you well know, is in no way average. In fact, he's so incredibly small that he weighed about half of what an average mouse weighs, 2 ounces. That is all. Think about it. He was nothing but 2 ounces of mouse pushing a spool of thread that weighed almost as much as he did. Honestly, reader, what do you think the chances are of a small mouse succeeding in his quest? Zip. 0. Nada. Goose eggs. But you must, when you are calculating the odds of the mouse's success, factor in his love for the princess. Love, as we have already discussed, is a powerful, wonderful, ridiculous thing, capable of moving mountains and spools of thread. Even with the love and purpose in his heart, Despereaux was very, very tired when he reached the door to the castle kitchen at midnight. His paws were shaking and his muscles were jumping, and the place where his tail should be was throbbing. And he still had a very, very long way to go into the kitchen and down the many, many stairs of the dungeon. And when somehow, some way, through the rat-filled darkness of the dungeon itself, not knowing where he was going, and reader, oh reader, when he stopped to consider what lay ahead of him, Despereaux was filled with an icky feeling of despair. He leaned his head against the spool of thread, and he smelled celery there. He thought of Hovis and how Hovis seemed to believe in him and his quest. So the mouse raised his head and squared his shoulders and pushed the spool of thread forward again into the kitchen, where he saw too late that there was a light burning. Despereaux froze. Cook was in the kitchen. She was bent over the stove, stirring something. What was it? Sauce? No. Was it stew? No. What the cook was stirring was soup. Soup, reader! In the king's own castle, against the king's law, right under the king's very nose, the cook was making soup. As the mouse looked on, Cook put her face into the steam rising from the pot, and she took a deep breath. She smiled a beatific smile, and the steam rose around her and caught the light of the candle and made a halo over her head. Despereaux knew how Cook felt about mice in her kitchen, and he remembered quite clearly her instructions to Meg regarding himself. Kill him. The only good mouse is a dead mouse. But he had to go through Cook's kitchen to get to the dungeon door, and he had no time to waste. Soon daylight would dawn and the whole castle would be awake, and a mouse would have no chance at all of pushing a spool of thread across the floor without attracting a great deal of attention. He would have to sneak past the mouse-hating Cook now. And so, screwing on all his courage to the sticking place, Despereaux leaned against the spool of thread and set it to rolling across the floor. Cook turned from the stove, a dripping spoon in her hand, a frightened look on her face, and shouted, "Who's there?" And that's where we're going to leave her. Next time we get together, it'll be chapter 44. Whose ears are those? We'll see if Despereaux gets through Cook's kitchen to get to the dungeon. Okay, hope you have a great day. Find something fun to do. Use your imagination. Maybe write a story or read other stories, or maybe act out stories with your brothers and sisters, or make up stories of your own. Till we read again. Bye.